Well, welcome everyone. Grab your coffee or your tea. I guess probably tea would be more appropriate, or your beverage of choice, because I thought it would be fun for us to sit down together and look over some of the pictures from this absolutely magnificent Scotland garden. So I recently, as you know, went on a garden tour to Scotland with Garden Gate magazine. We visited so many venues, so many spectacular gardens. In fact, after a while, they kind of begin to run together. And I think that's the brilliance of taking lots of photos, so that you can go back and you can kind of deconstruct. Now, if you're like me, when you go on a garden tour, that's especially a magnificent garden tour like these, it's easy to be overwhelmed. And I think it's important that we do take lots of images or lots of notes so that we can go back and we can kind of deconstruct what it was that was our motivation for capturing that particular image. Now mine, a lot of them I just took quickly. There were a lot of people there, and we just tried to be polite with one another, but you'll notice that a lot of them have other guests in them. Sometimes I took them for practical reasons. I wanted to capture something that I might want to build in the future, or that might be a good idea for us. Sometimes it was strictly just the beauty of the garden, but I'll try to give you a little glimpse into my thinking as I took each snapshot, why I wanted to capture that and bring it back. So just like I say, maybe even grab a pen and paper. Feel free to stop the video at any point in time and make a screenshot of it. My photography isn't necessarily brilliant, but it served my purpose, which was to capture ideas for all of us really to enjoy. So this first one is Shepherd House. And let me read you the same brief description that we were given. It was, when we first arrived, the charming host was there to greet us, and I'll show a picture of him later. And here's the description. Our first garden is the cozy 17th century shepherd house. Just wrap your head around that, 17th century, which sits in the rural village of Inveresk, surrounded by a garden for all seasons. Owners Charles and Anne Fraser have lived here for decades and designed the gardens themselves. The show starts in May with bulbs and other spring flowering shrubs and perennials. And as a reminder, we were there in June, the last part of June. Roses and perennials are next. Borders and climbing plants produce a variety of colors during the summer months. The formal pond with fountain and statue gives a nice contrast with the abundance of flowers. Walls protect this garden against winds and frost, and I might add is just so crucial to the overall sense of place that you get while you're there, and a beautiful, beautiful backdrop that probably all of us lust over as we are creating our own gardens. So they are able to grow a surprising number of less hardy plants than you might expect here because of the small microclimates that they can create. And then after that, we went to the charming village of Dunbar, the birthplace of John Muir. That was fascinating. And then we went to another garden in the afternoon. But this one itself, you might want to Google it online to get a lot more information than I can provide right here. And that was Shepherd House. So thanks to Garden Gate, let's begin the tour. Well, this area with that fabulous stone marking above that reads Shepherd House Garden, this was just outside of the area where we were facing the area where we pulled up in the bus on a very, very narrow rural street. So kudos to the bus driver for being able to navigate them. And the area to your left, this was brilliant to me, and I think it's a great idea for us to take home. That area, and I'll show you more pictures of it shortly, was what he called a throwaway area. It was just in the front off of the street. He said people used to treat it disrespectfully. There would be lots of trash and debris and things like that in there. And he said, but if I beautified it, I really felt people would respect the space more. And indeed they do, because that garden is spectacular. Any of us would love to have just a garden just of that in his throwaway space. but it tells us that if we want something to really be respected and appreciated, then we beautify it, and he indeed did that. And I also think that there's wonderful importance to naming our gardens in some way. So Shepherd House Garden tells us where we are, and it also gives us an indication of just how old this garden is. And I mean, look at those beautiful plinths that frame the doorway with the pots on them. I think it's really a beautiful approach. And then again, speaking to the vintage of this garden, look at this magnificent clay tile roof with its moss. And then when you walk into it, you immediately see topiary. So yes, my heart did skip a beat, and those are just euonymus, you guys. And then you see these beautiful portals, these windows that they have introduced into their evergreen hedges, and you look through them and into little vignettes that they have staged beyond, and you get a glimpse of what is to come. You can see that clipped boxwood. Okay, well, this is a no-brainer. So I took this image because of I mean, look at the magnificence of this beautiful roof garden over this charming stone hedge, or charming stone shed. I mean, look at that. There's no way I could do anything like that. This probably doesn't have any kind of supplemental irrigation to it, even though it consists of fern and other plants that really like a temperate climate like Scotland's, that is wet, that is foggy, that is gray. But look at how beautiful that is. And it also isn't so tall. It's kind of like a little hobbit shed, a potting shed, that the homeowners in the gardeners, they can even clip off some of the dead foliage or whatever without getting, dragging a ladder out. But I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I just love the whole tapestry of different textures, planes. Some of it's horizontal, some of it's vertical, and I think that's just really, really wonderful. Well, it was interesting to me that I noticed a pattern. As soon as I would get there, I would go to the places that were more utilitarian maybe than the formal borders. And look at this wonderful little area that they've got in the back where they have raised beds with my beloved gravel. They're used to grow both edimentals and edibles and ornamentals. So things that are inherently beautiful in their own right. And then you just pass through another portal into another area of the garden. And we here in the States, maybe not so much on the East Coast or the West Coast, but those of us in the center with our weather extremes, we can only imagine and dream of having evergreen hedges like that, in which we could craft these kinds of windows into other rooms of the garden. You can see there the cosmos and the sweet peas. It's just kind of a hodgepodge of beautiful things. There's some squash there, and then I love it because there's punctuation on the side of more clipped boxwood. That's yew and boxwood. This leads to an area that is just, I mean, such a tidy, such a lust-worthy compost area, because you can see all of the different bins. I mean, what a brilliant and beautiful composting area with its separate bins for various stages of compost. And then, of course, it's adorned with things like horseshoes and different kind of metallic art. And then just behind it, the perfect color echo of that stone wall, which, who knows, probably dates back to the 1600s too. And it is just functional beauty at its best. I love all the weathered gray of it. I am drawn to these kinds of areas, and it's really simply breathtaking if a compost pile can be breathtaking. I really think it is. And it obviously is used to enhance the quality of all of the soil in these other raised beds. Look at the staking that's in place. It's rustic, it's befitting the garden. You can see the glass house in the distance. And all of this kind of is in the same geographic area of the garden near the potting shed where they've got tools hung on the exterior, those sweet little clay pots. Everything about this just makes me swoon. So it's just magical. And in this area right here, I know I took this picture because I wanted to really record the brilliance of just using, and excuse my using brilliance over and over again, but it is kind of a British term, and it so aptly describes the ingenuity with which they use simple materials like these inexpensive bamboo poles and string and wire, and it just all seems so contextual. And then, of course, everywhere you look, there are just massive topiaries, primarily in the form of just boxwood balls, some of which are larger and some of which are smaller, like those on the left right here. And there's a glimpse right here of one of my new friends, Deborah. I believe that was Deborah, who lives in Nichols Hills, close to us, and she's visiting there with the homeowner and the garden owner. And then this is a section of the herbaceous border. I love all of that chartreuse. Partly I love it because not only is it beautiful and it really draws your eye and illuminates that area, a perfect example of how a bright foliage can kind of illuminate a dark space. But I also love it because some of that material, plant material, is stuff I have in my own garden. It's spirea, I believe some of that is ligustrum, and then you can see in the foreground the foliage in lilies underneath the canopy of, I believe it was some kind of fruit tree, but it all draws your eye down the path, down the ancient cobblestone path to the edge. And again, you can see with the walls how it divides these spaces into different garden rooms. That might have also been some golden barberry. But I took this because I just love the fact that it was using, I took a lot of pictures of things that used elements I have in my own garden so I could maybe use them more effectively in my own. And even in June, there was plenty in bloom, but also there was just a wonderful use of foliage of things that were not yet in bloom and color contrasting. And the thing that was probably stood out to me the most in the gardens here was the use of hedgerow. And in that picture, in fact, let's go back just a little bit, because you can see the different plant material that was used to create a hedgerow in the making. And I noticed this everywhere. I noticed it in the public parks. I noticed it along private drives that led up to these gardens. And that was their use of hedgerow, but the hedgerows weren't monolithic. They contained all different kinds of plant material that wanted to grow in the same proximity, and then they would just kind of prune it accordingly. So there was great texture, there was great, it almost created a mosaic effect in this wall of a hedgerow that was used in so many different places, in contrast to this absolutely incredible, magnificent boxwood sculpture of pyramids surrounded by squares and diagonals of boxwood. And yes, they do have boxwood blight in this area. This garden hadn't suffered from it too extremely. In fact, I can't remember, perhaps not at all, but I was happy to tell them about better boxwood and its advantages in terms of being very much resistant to boxwood blight. And then if you look in the back, of this, you can see what I think of as that purple haze, what I tried to create here at the cottage. In here they used, I think, like lavender and alliums and nepeta, and in their case, they used a lot. I noticed all over Scotland, this is a note you'll want to take down, they used a lot of Six Hills Giant, which bloomed so much more spectacularly than some of the other varieties with the more diminutive flowers. But I love this kind of haze that just draws your eye toward the house and all of the textural components in this image, with, of course, the dramatic clipped evergreens in the foreground. And more topiary to punctuate that area and create another contrast in form. And then everywhere you look, there were climbers everywhere of every variety. This is some wisteria, but there were different kinds of, and look at, speaking of, look at the trunk on that wisteria. Things were everywhere. Boxwood balls were everywhere. They would have these little sweet theaters of all sorts of different kinds of plants, just little bookshelves, if you will, of plants that were scattered throughout the garden. And then, of course, I just lusted big time after this color palette. This whole vignette gave me great ideas. I need to introduce some purple iris, and I think just more lavender plants in general. There they had lots of things I cannot grow very well here, at least not without time. They had lots of lavender and purple Canterbury bells, lots of different kinds of perennial geraniums, and some different low-growing things I couldn't even really recognize. But nevertheless, I think I'll be able to provide some doppelgangers for here at the cottage in the way of Verbena bonariensis and things. They had a lot of echinops and blue thistle there. Thistle is the national flower of Scotland, so they had different elements like that. And in their very good draining soil, they also had a considerable amount of lavender. And you can see then the white begins. That beautiful, beautiful mosaic of not just the plants, but the different textures and materials used in the pathway. This aged cement, the cobblestones, the pebbles. Then there's grade elevation changes, and then there's an archway over the steps that go up into another garden room. Some of the flower beds themselves are elevated and framed in stone and punctuated, and this is something I try to do here at the cottage, punctuated with boxwood balls in this beautiful rhythm and repetition across the space. I think that is just wonderful. And yes, it might be a little bit crowded, but it wasn't at all difficult to navigate. And I think that's very befitting a cottage garden, as most of these were. And I think it's also befitting of my own cottage garden here. I really did love the lavender on the edges, and I may have to figure out a way to try it again here at the cottage. And then one space just easily flows into another space. Here's another climber. Oh, and I took this picture very distinctly and very intensely and intentionally, because another thing that they used brilliantly was the use of cotoneaster in so many different varieties, so many different forms, so many different shapes. That is something that we can grow here. Here they've got it just starting to climb a wall, and yet it still spills. And the cotoneaster is a plant that we can find in various different kinds of varieties here in the States. I mean, this right here just, I mean, I don't even know what to say. It's just perfect, as is this. Notice the repetition of a semblance of this light blue. Here it's helping a climbing rose grow up through the tutor. Lots of potted plants everywhere. This is something that I try to emulate, and I do try to do it, but remember, they have nearly perfect gardening conditions year-round. And where we live, to keep container gardens like this looking their best, that requires a huge amount of labor, attention, and time. And also switching out plants, which is also a difficulty for us because our inventory of available plants in our nurseries and garden centers definitely decreases over time. But this is just marvelous with its combination of annuals and succulents and just different kinds of, some of it I can't even tell. Is it blue star creeper? Okay, I have to point out, because it makes me feel good, please note that there is a dandelion in that pot of boxwood, lest we begin to feel too bad about ourselves. And here's more. I mean, the different varieties of delphinium. They had lots of leeks, the cheap man's allium, lots of alliums, and their seed heads don't even dry up like ours do. Different pots that has sage in them that would meet at the confluence of two different paths. And then in the center, there would be a beautiful pot with some, it looks like Zinnia linariensis, some just culinary sage, different things spilling out over the edge. And then those perfectly round boxwood balls. And I believe those are boxwood. There could be other types of evergreens they had there. When I look at the images, it reads as a boxwood ball, but these might be something else as well. Even some of their privet didn't look like ours. It was much less lanky and much fuller. And then look at that beautiful, beautiful lavender along the edges of the aged brick paths. And I love that English daisy spilling out over the edge. That's something else I've tried to recreate. Now here I see some friends. I see some familiarity, some Verbena bonariensis. I see some East Friesland salvia, a lot of which I have. Another thing they can grow in Scotland that I really have trouble growing here, and that is lots of lady's mantle. I believe there's some in the context of this one perennial planting here. There were some in the previous slide. It cascades over the edges and self-seeds. I think they probably consider it almost a weed, which just seems very unfair to me. Stuart's laughing, it just seems very unfair to me. But again, if you notice that we have not had in any of these images even a hint of sunshine. So that's kind of the price you pay. But again, in this, just again, please look at the verticality of some of the iris, the umbral heads of the yarrow, and then just the pixelated view of all of the different perennials that are in the perennial border with their tiny flower heads. But it creates a montage that just really can't be beat. And also notice as we progress through the slides how a lot of things are limbed up. Okay, look at this. Some of you that are artistic, you could do this. Yes, it would take a lot of time, but what a fabulous mosaic of different kinds of pebbles. And then also there's the repetition of that color of sky blue in that garden bench, because after all, sometimes you should need a place to sit. They do have, some of you are asking, do these gardeners have help? And yes, they do. They have people that come in and help them a couple of times a week. Remember, the growth there it's slower and steadier over a protracted period of time, so it doesn't come all at once. So their things don't require pruning as frequently as ours do, because they also don't have the warm temperatures like we do. My friend Kristen, the editor at Garden Gate, she was all here because she definitely wants to incorporate some kind of espalier. And here there is an espalier fence. I believe this one was apple. Look at how they have painted the wooden posts in their signature light blue. And look at the glass house in the distance. Everything comes together because of how it is repeated in one line or in one pattern across a space. And the same colors are also repeated in pattern and color across the space. And if there's any one thing that I try to communicate on my own channel, it's the design principle of just that. And look at also how tailored and how groomed the edge is. So even if that turf was nothing but weeds, because of its beautiful edge, it would always look tailored. I mean, how romantic is this? It's just the essence of romance, because it's got pale pink roses that are echoed by the projecting pale pink foxglove. Again, it's something else I love to have here. There's white roses. Most of them were fragrant. I couldn't begin to tell you all of the different varieties of roses that were growing here, but they really helped contribute to the romance of the place. And notice that on the left, we've got this this punctuation of white, and you've also got white in the lawn furniture, in the glass house, and also in the plantings of the container that are just outside the glass windows. Look at just that one beautiful poppy there. They also have a confluence of bloom we can't create here because of the continuity of their seasons and the continuity of their the gentle nature of their seasons. So they can have poppies in bloom with peonies in bloom, with roses in bloom, with all sorts of other things of light colors. One of my big takeaways from this garden and many, many others was Estrantia. And I definitely want to find some. In fact, one of the guests, one of the tourists along with me, had already ordered some before she even got back to her hotel room that night. She had ordered some, I think she said, from White Flower Farm. This is an iconic fountain in their garden, and it's in lots of the publicity they have. It's in their brochures. I'm sure it's on their website. And Stuart, we need to remember to put their website below. And these kinds of water features, they also require maintenance and labor. They have gardened here for a very long period of time. Just remember that. Oh, there's some of that beautiful Veronica that I have. So it's allowed things to get mature and grow. And this, oh, here, a beautiful, beautiful example of limbing up right here. This is what I did with the Woodgelia at my former home, and what so many of you have told me that you are also trying yourselves. I will ultimately be doing this with a star magnolia that I have, but this way it doesn't look leggy, it doesn't look messy, it looks like a small tree rather than a large shrub. But it makes so much more of a dramatic specimen in the garden than it would if it were just overgrown with suckers everywhere. And then it's just mulched in that wonderful, sensual gray gravel that looks gorgeous with the walls, with the stone walls, and just makes that wonderful noise underneath. And there was just so much to take in. I mean, just look at this growing up. That is an arborvitae or a chemisiporus growing up a tree. Just, if you can hear a little bit of disgust in my voice, it's only out of envy. I mean, look at this. Now, this is something that is a vibe that I'm trying to create here at the cottage. And I let me know, here's my question of the day, I guess. Am I succeeding in that? because I'm trying to get this counterpoint of strong architectural form in the way of orbs against other kinds of forms that grow more vertically, that cascade over the edge, and that are just more profuse and more abundant, but in this color palette of chartreuse, of lavender, of purple, of white, and dark green that's periodically punctuated by seasonal color of pinks. And what? That's a lot of peas. That's a lot of peas. And I have to tell you guys, it's hard for me to say because I had a crown on it and my mouth is still partially anesthetized. So if I sound funny, that's why. And I mean, look at that. Look at the color of that wall. Now stop right here and I want you to note the color echo. See if you can find it. Look at the color echo between the undersides of those white roses and the perfect color match with that stucco wall. Now, was that intentional? I don't know. But is it fabulous? Yes, it is. And then if you look to your right, you can see that same color echoed in the clay tiles. So that kind of thing is something that only happens after a great amount of time, a great amount of observation, and taking lots of images where you can then point out these kinds of wonderful snapshots to others as they walk through the garden. There's some of that at the bottom mid-screen is some more of that lady's mantle, and then just lots of fluffy, fluffy purple and white. There doesn't have to be a ton of bloom and a ton of color for something to be ever so glorious. And one room moves into another garden room. And I hope you guys appreciate these little bits of video I was able to capture because it was really hard to keep a phone charge while I was here so that I could capture all of this. There's that fabulous fountain and you get a glimpse of how one thing, oh look, there's my friend Helen there. I love the boxwood. I love that water rill. Here, this tone on tone. In both of these images, the tone on tones with the whites and the grays. Yes, this is an olive tree. And oh my goodness, in my dreams. There's more massive, most of that was yew, hedges and walls. There's more of that espalier. And the espalier serves as a wall to create different garden rooms. And there were urns on pedestals everywhere. Of course, they were all ancient. There's some echinops. People seem to either love or hate sea holly. This is a different vantage point of that formal clipped hedge. And just think what it would be without that lavender in front. 2006, such innovative, ancient ways to mark time. And that's not an expensive proposition, you guys, is to do in that previous video where you have poles that are up to support things. They're just wooden posts that have wooden finials, anything nothing that can't be gotten at Lowe's or Home Depot, and continues that blue progressing through. Here's more. I am dying to figure out a way to grow these English daisies because I love it. Here's another common plant material, but used to brilliant effect. That's just, I think, red pygmy barberry with spirea, with some golden privet. And if you've got a large area to fill, if you've got a lot of real estate, if you are very fortunate to have a massive garden, then here's a way to do it. And provide a little bit of security in the meantime, because that barberry will get a little bit thorny, but not in a bad way if you keep it pruned. And by the way, this garden, when we were there, I think the same words came out of every one of our mouths. How can any of the subsequent gardens be any better than this? How is that even possible? And yet, I guess this is a tease for future garden tours that are going to be coming up while I'm on sabbatical, because this one captured my heart because it was a love story between the two homeowners. And I will tell you a little bit more about them in the future. I think that was some kind of Thai basil. Look at those delphiniums. That was another constant. Delphiniums just grow like weeds there, and that is just wrong. That is just so wrong. I put this picture up on Instagram because I loved it. Here's another example of that rhythm and repetition in those potted plants. In fact, I'm gonna just go back just a little bit, because this is something that any of us can do, and that is create similar plantings. Here it's just sage, and it looks like, I don't know if that's a marguerite daisy or what, but that is just something that we all can do, is just plant multiple singular pots, all the same type of pots with all the same kind of planting, up and down an expanse, whether that's a walkway or your steps or along the edge of a pool. More succulents on a bed of grit to help with drainage. An overall view of the garden and kind of how it fits together. Not all of the gardens had this. Stuart brilliantly put this in here just for you guys. And then one portal leads to the next portal, and talk about framing the view and the vista beyond. Every vista, every planting was better than the last. This one, again, really speaks to me because it's in my color palette, so I always pause on those that I really like the best. Look at those pots. I actually have one of those pots in the foreground, the kind of braided pot, and I will be using it perhaps in such a manner. They just have, I think, little echeveria in there or some kind of succulent. As I said, there were planters and urns absolutely everywhere, all in plantings that were pretty much in that color palette. And if any of you are going to try doing that pebble mosaic, please let me know, because I would definitely want to show it somewhere on this channel. And please, of course, in the comments, let me know what your favorite things are. Lots of grays also, if you'll notice, there's lots of grays here. Lots of spillage, lots of plants growing at different levels. There's Deborah again, getting a photograph. And people just commenting on the gardens. I think we were all a little bit gobsmacked by this garden, and you have to kind of look at it in its totality. In fact, I need to put a garden guide out for how to take a garden tour, but I still haven't figured it out yet. Because how you look at these spaces really informs what you can take away from them. Lots of pictures obviously helps, but as you can see here, because there's some redundancy, look at that limbing up. You talk about, wow. But there's some redundancy, because what I did was I walked through the whole garden first, snapping probably way too many images, and then I would walk through it again to capture those areas, if I could remember where they were, that held ideas that I wanted to bring back home. Because as beautiful as some of this is, it just really isn't possible. But some of it is possible, and I will try. For example, look at these scented geraniums. I need to call my friend Monica, because now I realize I need more scented geraniums in my life. Some of them succumbed in the move, But I mean, look at these. And this is going to go into another exceptional area. Well, maybe not. Here's another repeat because I liked it so much. And I loved this apricot with the yellow. And I also took this picture again to remind me that I need to have some kind of marker to my garden. Okay, this gentleman, if this may be the biggest takeaway of all. If this gentleman isn't a testament to the fact that gardening keeps you young, I don't know what is, because this gentleman, unless I misspeak, I'm pretty sure, is 96 years old. And his wife, who didn't, she was absolutely lovely, and she did come out to the garden to greet us. She mostly stayed in the glass house where they served us shortbread and tea. It was so charming. But this guy, man, he was a hoot. He had personality. He was asking us all sorts of questions since we were predominantly Americans. He didn't shy away from any topics. He was just adamant about how gardening was a love story between himself and his wife. And there were certain areas that very much were reflective of that and built and grown in homage to that love story. And what an inspiration. I mean, absolutely what an inspiration, starting with that, take an area that wasn't such a much and transform it beautifully so that others will appreciate it as well. He just did that on his own, and he was just, both of them were delightful, but he in particular stole my heart in his ever so Scottish attire. He was out there gardening. He too couldn't stand to walk by a weed without picking it. Well, what a trip for me to just reflect back on that garden. And as we go through other ones in a like manner, I will try to tell you why I took images of what and what inspiration I brought home. And from this one, it was definitely the expansive use of different kinds of lavender flowers, particularly the spiky tones of the iris. It was, again, just, I think, reinforced for me the importance of line, shape, and form in the garden and the creation of garden rooms, of naming certain areas. He also named certain areas, but most importantly, the fact that it can keep you, it is the secret. It is the fountain of youth. Gardening will keep us all young, and I hope that you guys enjoyed that as much as I did and found it inspirational. Thank you for putting up with my wayward mouth that still isn't working real well. But please look forward to different gardens that lie ahead. Garden Gate, thank you for taking me along on this magnificent, magnificent tour. And to all of my friends, to Ruth and Helen and Deborah and Mary and Jane. I mean, there are so many of you. I so enjoyed getting to meet you, and I can't thank you enough for really sharing in this experience with me. You guys take care, and I'll see you on the next tour.